Hey, this is Brent Raynes for Alternate Perceptions online magazine, and it's June 14th, early morning, Wednesday. And I have a very special guest, Christopher O Brien, who I interviewed back in for Alternate Perceptions back in April of 2009. And he's the author of Stalking the Herd, Mysterious Valley, and Enter the Valley, regarding many of the high, strange events and manifestations that have been reported over the years in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. And he also delves into other areas and a lot of high, strange elements, the cattle mutilations, religious phenomena, paranormal, UFOs, a lot of things of great interest. And Peter Jordan, who I've interviewed 6 times, just interviewing him straight in the last few months, is joining us this morning. He's been very involved over the years in a lot of high strange things himself, and also spent over a week, as I recall, out in the in New Mexico with former State Trooper Gabe Valdez, looking into the cattle mutilation situation there. I can't even begin to just abbreviate what all you, the two of you, have been involved with. So, and of course, you know each other from over the years too. So, um, let's just, I guess, dive right into it. um, I know that from our interview back in 2009, there was a great deal that was going on, and it seems like maybe there's been a little uptick in cattle mutilations around Colorado and Texas and such in recent months. Is this significant? Or I know a lot of times there's um, the media kind of sensationalizes some things, and some things end up being just predator and such. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Once the media gets involved, and everybody is alerted to the possibility that there are some strangely slain livestock in the neighborhood, every dead cow that people see, they go check it out, and I think a good example of this would be an interesting, uh, a good example of kind of seeing what you're expecting to see. Should I put it that way? Was an episode of strange, mysterious window pitting that occurred in Washington State. If I remember back in the
Mm.
60s or 70s, when somebody went out one morning and noticed that they had strange chips out of their windshield,
yeah.
reported it. It got some media play, and everybody all of a sudden went out and noticed that their windows were pitted, and it created a bit of a panic, and it falls sometimes into that category of the delusion of crowds, and people seeing what they misconstrue or misinterpret as something unusual or high strange, when in fact they're just looking at something that is they normally don't pay attention to, and all of a sudden it gains significance because of coverage in the media, and all of a sudden, boom, you have a wave of people claiming that they see it too, kind of thing. And when cows are reported strangely slain, mutilated, if you will, generally it's a local thing, and it doesn't really create much of a stir in the local and then subsequently the regional and national media, and it filters through the community, or through the ranchers' immediate circle of friends and neighbors and relatives, and it's more of a word of mouth thing. Uh, there isn't a huge emphasis placed on it, but well, I'll tell you, if any sort of police report is filed, any sort of article is written by the local, let's say the local livestock reporter for the local paper, then
Mhm.
this opens up the Pandora's box of possibility of people seeing things that they normally don't pay attention to, and then misidentifying what they're looking at. I'm not a veterinary pathologist by any stretch. I am not a law enforcement official, but I'll tell you, I've worked with quite a number of them over the years. Three or four veterinary pathologists, several crime labs, that sort of thing. And I've been brought along as a interested amateur. I've been brought along with my knowledge base to a point where I feel confident I can go out, look for some telltale signs at a crime scene or at a livestock death scene. I can look for some things and get an indication if uh, that this thing is high strange and deserves attention. The average person doesn't have that luxury of 30 years of meeting people like New Mexico State Patrolman Gabe Valdez, meeting people like Dr. John King from the New York State Veterinary College, or any number of George Onett from National Institute of Discovery Sciences, Dr. Lefty Levengood at the Pinelandia Biophysics Lab. I mean, I could go down the list of individuals that I've had the good fortune to learn from. And once you get a basic understanding of what it is that you're looking at, you're not going to be looking at it like your neighbor next door seeing a dead cow out in his pasture, going out and going, "Oh my God, they got my Bessie. They came down, they flew down, and you know, they got my cow." I'm not saying that that's that this is a lot of nuance goes on in this
Mhm.
subject. So I'm not trying to paint a one size fits all picture, but if you get a case that gets reported in a local paper, and then multiple cases that get reported in a regional paper, and then it's picked up by the national and international wire services, you're going to have a lot of people reporting dead cows that don't know what they're looking at. So I know it's a long winded answer and dissertation here, but really I've got to create a caveat here and really remind people that this is a very complicated, difficult, no one size fits all subject, and there's very, very few people that are authorities in this particular realm. And Peter, with his amount of work that he's done over the years, it's been a while since he's been out in the field, but still, he has a pretty good sense of how the width and breadth of this thing, based on his work with experts in various disciplines, scientific and law enforcement.
Yeah,
So
and I just want to say just a few things off of what Chris is saying. Um, Chris is one of the few that I came to know over the years who I felt really appreciated the nuance, and I learned a lot from Chris O'Brien, David Perkins, and a lot of some of the pioneers, the people that
Mhm.
really were in the forefront of this, that have been forgotten to a large extent, um, and don't get the credit that they deserve for what they've done. Maybe because their voices aren't as loud as a lot of the other media entrepreneurs that are out there, who constantly, um, are gluttons for attention on podcasts and books and all of that. And people like Chris and David Perkins were doing the work. They were in the trenches doing the work. And I know, Brent, you and I go way back, and both of us know that no matter how good anything sounds on the surface of it, it really needs to be explored in a multitude of different ways. And the approach to all of this should always be interdisciplinarian. I've always felt that it can't just
yeah,
rely on my background psychology. I have a master's from the New School for Social Research, studied under Leon Festinger. That was my specialty, was social psychology. So I come out of that academic realm. When I was always a Fortean. I was highly influenced, like many of us were, by John Keel, who was a friend, and We had many communications about subjects such as this. And when I got involved in this particular topic, I thought, wow, this is something where it cannot be denied that there's some physical evidence at least. So at least we have something physical taking place that we can study. I never realized how complicated it was. And not being a biologist, not being a pathologist, I felt I was pretty naive. I accepted a lot of things that I heard, that I was told, that I relied upon. So when I first entered this particular subject, I made a lot of mistakes and believed things that I shouldn't have believed. And I've, you know, I've been duly chastised. And you know, Dan Kagan, Ian Summers, they were friends of mine. And I was so passionate about this subject when I came back from my research in Dulce, New Mexico. I said, you're not going to believe how explosive this is. You guys, when you start going out there, you're going to blow the wall. And they came back and sat me down and said, you need to really get some decaf coffee because you are too excited about this and you are going to look foolish. I am telling you, there's nothing to this. That's what they said. There's nothing to it. I find that hard to believe because I just came back from Dulce and I sat side by side with the Gomez family, and nobody struck me as being crazy. They were desperately trying to figure out what this was. And I believed it had that it was totally abnormal. It wasn't, that there had to be some sort of explanation other than predatory damage. And they said, no, absolutely. Gabe Valdez is completely wrong. You are going to find this to be true. I still don't believe that, by the way. And again, what Chris is saying, it has to be nuanced. It has to be balanced. You have to be able to look at both sides to admit when you're wrong, but also to not accept everything everyone tells you, including people that are attempting to debunk a subject or those that believe too much in it. And the reason I asked to be part of this is only because Chris is one of the few. When you read, everybody should read Stalking the Herd. Now, I've read that. It's an encyclopedic book on the subject, and it's the only book I know of that is completely devoted to this particular subject and does it in such a way that it looks at every possible aspect, the socio-political, the zeitgeist, how things were, the satanic panic, how that might tie in. There's so many important things in that book. It's not for everybody. I've recommended it to people and they go, why are you wasting your time with this subject? There are so many more important things. I said, I don't think there are things more important. I think
Yeah,
this is a very important subject.
it's
Uh,
crucial
Right,
to our
right.
understanding. It really
Yeah.
is, and again, I must interrupt you and agree that we stand on the shoulders of giants. John
Mm-hmm.
Keel, Ivan Sanderson, the two of them were two of the earliest cavern
Yep.
mutilation researchers in
Uh-huh.
pre-Snippy, which is
Uh-huh.
our zeitgeist case, which really kind of started the ball rolling. Back in the mid '60s, they were tramping around in West Virginia
Mm-hmm.
and parts of Pennsylvania and Ohio, and they were finding cases back there that were defied description. And and David Perkins and Tom Adams, I think,
Oh,
were the
absolutely.
absolute,
Absolutely.
the I call David the grandfather of mutology,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he chuckles and says, "Wow, if I'm going to be remembered for something, it might as well be something like that because this is really a truly baffling mystery. And if
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't put in 30 years trying to solve this, if I had known then when I started out what I know now, I would not have gotten involved in this. This is just it's it's a realm that has no real easy answers, and intellectually and philosophically, there are no rewards for this kind of work.
No.
It's a thankless thing. It's social suicide in some sense of the word. you know, somebody at a cocktail party or something, a backyard barbecue. Hey, Chris, what you been working on lately? And you know, you kind of look at
Yeah.
the grill and go, well, I'm kind of checking out you know, where your steaks come from and how some of them don't make it here like the rest of them do. And
Hmm.
it's our relationship with cattle is one of the most important uh, dark closet subjects in Western culture, and the fact that one of the signpost status symbols of Western culture is putting a steak on the bobby. You know,
Hmm.
getting a big old hunk of red bloody meat, and being able to afford the luxury of cooking that thing up and using it as a source of viable nutrition and protein. It's it's not something that's going to continue much longer past our lifetimes because of its detrimental, the implications of its detrimental nature to the sanctity and health of humans and quite frankly the health of the planet.
Agreed.
I think who was it? Jeremy Rifkin, who wrote the famous book Beyond Beef, agreed with the gentleman that came up with the concept of Gaia, James Lovelock,
Hmm.
that there are the three C's are the things that are going to do in humans' role as custodians on this planet, and they are cattle, chainsaws, and cars.
Hmm.
Those three things are going to be the most detrimental elements that we unleash on our environment, and they have been the most detrimental elements. You know, if you look at cattle's role in human health and the health of the environment, by far, cattle are the most detrimental life form on the planet besides humans, obviously. But they're, you know, the largest source of desertification, one of the largest polluters of fresh water, one of the main reasons why they're cutting down the rainforest, the lungs of the planet, is to make room for more cattle. You know, I could go down the list of detrimental elements that more and more countries that are becoming affluent and becoming first world countries. Like I said, that's the first thing that they look at as an indication of their coming up in the world is being able to afford to eat beef protein. And unfortunately, we can't sustain this this growth of beef consumption. Now, in this country, we actually have been on the decline. At the height of the mutilation waves in 1975 through 79, that was the height of beef consumption in this country. And it
Hmm.
was also when we had more cattle in the United States than at any other time in history. And ever since then, the number of cattle in the herds has dramatically decreased with the outsourcing of beef raising to South America, Australia, and importing cows from India.
Hmm.
So, you know, I could go on and on and on and on and on this subject. I do thank you. I appreciate your kind, you know, sort of plugging of my book, Stalking the Herd. But yeah, I went into this book project not wanting to bang any sort of drums as it has to do with my foregone conclusions of what's going on here.
Hmm.
I wanted to be as objective and as even-handed as I could possibly be, which, without going into it and then naming names, but everybody knows who the proponents of the most prevailing theory that we have out there, and that is that aliens, ETs, aliens, quote, 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 are coming down and mutilating cattle for purposes of gaining genetic material to hybridize their dying race. And whenever somebody comes at me and says, "Well, wait a minute, I thought they solved that. It's, cattle mutilation or aliens doing this for genetic material," I'd say, "Well, why do aliens have to sneak around in pastures, around the Western world, instead of going into a slaughterhouse at night, picking the lock, going in there, going through the wall, as it were, materializing into the slaughterhouse or the abattoir and grabbing gallons and gallons and gallons of genetic material that's just sitting in big vats and being washed down the drains in there. And why can't they just grab that genetic material instead of targeting, Father Jones's best breeding cow, Bessie? It just doesn't make any sense. It's counter.
Yeah, it never did. It never did.
Yeah.
I always kept an open mind to the possibility that underlying some of these cases might involve something like that. I would read accounts from Native Americans, for example, in which they would describe these types of, mutilations or whatever, and that they were attributing some of them to the Star people, so forth. So I thought, well, maybe, maybe a few, maybe some, but most of this seems to be earth-based in some way. And when the whole thing with the choppers, it's interesting how people seem to separate things or take things apart, extricate one thing from another, depending upon what they're trying to proselytize. So if it's a particular view, and this is a typical psychological principle, Chris knows it, we all know it, we're victims of it, of our human nature of trying to be able to compartmentalize things. It's easier for us to handle something being one thing than it is for us to admit to contradictory elements and to be able to put that together. The brain can't handle it. We just can't. It's cognitive overload.
Cognitive dissonance and overload.
Correct. So we all know that. So I always was aware of those principles and how they would affect me as an investigator. So what I would always try to do is to look at things from a multiplicity of different viewpoints. So I just, when everybody was pushing that, I thought, no. And then Linda Howe, to her credit, in the beginning, when I would first listen to what she was reporting, I said, her reporting seems to be very high caliber, seems to be very good, seems sensible. Why would somebody who was investigating this phenomenon, who thought perhaps it was something environmentally related, because that was her specialty when she was with ABC, CBS, or whatever the affiliate where that was what she handled, those kinds of projects, and had won all kinds of Peabody Awards and all that. And I thought, this is a journalist who's involved in this. That's refreshing to hear. Let's see what she says. But then over time, I thought, when I became aware of the fact that, for example, there were a lot of tranquilizing drugs and found in the bloodstream, well, everybody should be alert to that and say, wait a minute, I thought it was aliens.
Yeah,
why are aliens
using ketamine? Great.
And they're using ketamine and chlorpromazine and all of that. So I thought, well, wait a second, that puts a different spin on it. And when Gabe Valdez had me out in Dualston, shows me photos, and he goes, look at the backs of these cows, and they're hog-tied. I go, wait a minute. Aliens now are hog tying the back of the cows, right, to take them aboard, right? I thought they go up in a beam of light, right? And he said to me, this wouldn't be, this is ridiculous. And the Gomez family was there, and we're all talking, and nobody, I mean, not a single person said, maybe we're thinking it's alien. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, Tex Graves out in Colorado, oh, he sees the mothership. And I'm not saying that because, as we know,
Big Mama.
Big Mama, but there's tons of UFO. There's a lot of UFO activity, yes, in these parts, right? Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, going on all the time. So, yes, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, right? And in that case, I think, yeah, it could be related. Are the choppers related? Well, if the choppers are showing up, usually just before or just after. If they're showing up before, I'm really interested. Why are they showing up just before, preceding the event of the discovery of a cow? You would have to be an idiot to say, I don't think there's any kind of connection. And this is where I became offended by the fact that you have ufologists
Right.
desperately pushing back to keep this out of the arena because we don't want to show any kind of link between this. We're already in trouble because we don't have much credibility in the mainstream scientific community. So why would we want to lop this on top of it and add to that? That's
Well,
my
they took
that's
it
my
one step further. J. Allen Hynek and
uh-huh.
Jerry Clark, Jerome
Yeah,
Clark, of course, the eminent UFO historian, wrote the UFO Encyclopedia.
right.
And then later on,
Kevin Randall.
Kevin
Yeah,
Randall,
yeah, yeah.
who himself was a helicopter pilot,
Yes.
they made a concerted effort to place the blame for the mutilations, take it off of the UFO
And
scenario.
put it on the backs of Satanists.
Exactly, and it was
Correct.
because of their insistence that the BATF agent Donald Flickinger wrote a memo to this attesting to be on the lookout, an all points bulletin, be on the lookout for devil worshippers and Satanists who are going about mutilating cattle. And he sent this memo to every sheriff's department in the United States.
Yes.
We still, to this day, have to contend with headlines. The first headline, oftentimes, in a wave of mutilations, especially in the Midwest and the
Hmm.
Rocky Mountain states, in the conservative, shall we say, red state pastures of America, when these cases occur, invariably that will be the first headline. Satanists thought to be responsible for, or occultists blamed for, are often the headlines that you see that create the panic in the communities where these cases are happening, and then that gets that ball rolling of people's foregone conclusion that, hey, it's either that or aliens. You never hear the beef industry is trying to consolidate its land holdings by driving smaller ranchers out of business using mutilations as a terror tool or a terror tactic. I've never seen that particular headline before, and I've got proof that there were large ranching concerns that were using mutilations as a terror tactic. Or how about the beef industry and the Centers for Disease
Yes.
Control are terrified of the possibility of prion disease breaking out in the human food chain, and are checking our local herds here, and bum BF Missouri, Kansas, Texas, wherever, because they're deathly afraid of mad cow disease decimating the largest income producing
Hmm.
sector of agriculture. So getting back to my even-handed attempt at looking at all these particular uh, uh, divergent and convergent
Hmm.
possibilities, how it seems to me that we're dealing with multiple scenarios, multiple players who are piggybacking their agendas on top of other agendas that they may or may not be aware of, and using them to hide their particular agenda. And of course, the military and elements of the government are probably trying to figure out why these cases are going on themselves, and maybe mutilating cattle to look for the things that are being looked for by other agendas and other players. So
Well,
this is a
you know,
super complicated.
I remember I first started out as a member of APRO back in the days when Carl and um, uh, the Lorenzens were running the organization. And when I got involved in the mutilations, I started writing articles for their bulletin and so forth. And to her credit, I have to say from the very beginning, Carl Lorenzen, another person who's kind of forgotten, she was a force of nature, and Absolutely, probably one of the most brilliant researchers that I came in contact with. Um, I don't know if you knew her well, Chris, or
I never met Jim or
okay. I
Coral,
only met her once or twice because I spoke at some of their conventions.
but I
And
know where all her files are, and
yeah,
I
yeah.
tried for years to get the people that are holding on to them and hiding them
That's a
to
shame.
make them
Well,
available to other
well,
researchers.
well, she's from the very beginning when the Snippy case first started, uh, she came out and I think she was one of the people that actually assigned Kevin Randall and another investigator to look into some cases of mutilations that were taking place either in Minnesota, Kansas, somewhere. And they came back, of course, with the report that they thought it was, being done by Satanists. And Coral wrote a piece in one of the bulletins that I have, in which she said she didn't think that that could possibly be. There wouldn't be a satanic group doing this. It didn't follow the MO of a satanic group. Uh, there's a conspicuous lack of blood, whereas in satanic activity, there's usually a copious amounts of blood everywhere. And so she made she made the very interesting comment about the Snippy case, which kind of kicked this whole thing off in 1967. She said that she believed that it was probably due to an experiment that had gone awry, quote unquote, and that it was being done to sort of distract future researchers from what they were really doing. And Coral was probably the first person that I heard someone say something like that.
No.
Um, and that's back in 1967, 68 when she made that comment.
Well, she wrote the original long form examination of the infamous Snippy the horse case,
Right,
death of an Appaloosa.
right.
Mhm. Great
If
magazine.
anybody has a copy of that one, please send it to me.
Well,
That's a hard one.
it's funny. I heard you mention that once on a podcast, and I thought, oh, I thought I pretty much had found pretty much everything written on the subject from Fred Smith's little monograph. I have dozens of copies of that. I bought everything. I found everything online, or if I couldn't find it, I asked people because I wanted to read pretty much everything that I could on the subject. And I was exploring this right online when I said, "Where is this?" There's got to be so I went and I was looking at all of the stuff that she's ever published. There was a site that showed all of everything, and then they listed that, and I thought, oh, there it is. Oh, it was a special edition of Fate magazine
Oh,
in
I
1960.
didn't realize
So
that.
this, and I thought, so here's the funny thing about it. I said it's called The Death of an Appalooso, and it was co-written. It was a two-sided article, pro and con. So it was
Mhm.
her
Mm-hmm.
piece on one side, and the other was a member from NICAP. I forget his name. His name wasn't familiar, and he wrote the rebuttal to it. And I found this, and I thought, wow. And I went on to Amazon, and I think I picked it up for $3 or $4.
Oh,
And then I'm talking to Brent. Brent, you remember? And I said,
Yeah.
Brent has more books and articles than
Well,
I
I
can
do
remember.
have the fake
And
magazine article. Yeah.
I said to him, "Oh, you're never going to believe what I found. This article. I really should make a copy of this. I was going to send it to you. I forgot all about it." And he says, "Oh, it's right here. I have it right here." And he pulls out the copy from his bookshelf. I go, who has a copy of that book sitting on a bookshelf?" And you just pick it out and say, "Here you go." What a synchronicity that is. So bizarre. But
Yeah.
I'm going to make a copy for you of it. And there was nothing more in there that I hadn't heard her say in some of the bulletins and elsewhere. Uh, but when she was talking about the case later, she said, people can say what they want about this, but there is something, I'm not saying that it was done by euphonauts, but she says, I totally believe after looking at all the evidence, there was something highly anomalous and unusual about this death, and it's connected to something, and this animal was killed from something overhead. That's all she would say.
Yeah.
But then she went on to say, I believe that this was part of an experiment. She didn't say who, she just said an experiment, gone awry, and they're trying to distract future researchers possibly from being on the right track. I thought that was just, I don't know where that came from. I just found that fascinating because I think there's a lot of that going on. And I think
Yeah.
that was the start of it. I think that was the start of it. And that case is absolutely one of the most bizarre cases I think I've ever seen, and not just based upon your research, Chris, but everything from John, Schuler's work on that, and everything else that I read about it. It was absolutely fascinating, and if people want to know that, again, if you go back to Enter the Valley, Chris's books on Mysterious Valley, Enter the Valley. I think it was Enter the Valley where you have a whole like chapter devoted to it.
No, it's the first book,
The
Mysterious
first book,
Valley.
right?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And in Stalking the Herd, there's an entire chapter that's
yeah,
supplemented with new information.
absolutely. But the detail that you provided, I was not familiar with. And then Brent also was able to uncover other information that Tom Adams had with Massey when they went to the ranch and stayed there. I didn't know anything about that. I mean, I only knew Tom from writing to him and so forth. I loved Tom Adams. I mean, he was just, he was such a great researcher, and I loved those stigmata. I still have all of them. They opened my eyes to how many different possibilities. Um,
Well, I'm
and
glad that Ray Boucher and
yes,
PJ Pajams, they were able to. Well, David Perkins had the rights to all those
oh,
stigmatas, and they
okay.
went ahead, grabbed them, and published them anyway. And he
I'm
very
glad they did.
graciously
I'm glad they did.
he didn't make a big stink out of it. But all those stigmatas and the several editions of Crux, which was Tom's other
Yeah,
publication, and the Choppers and the Choppers, which is a listing of over 300 helicopter reports from mutilation sites. They were all put together uh, under the banner of the collected works of Tom Adams, and they're available now. They've been republished and are available on Amazon. And
yeah,
much of my material from Stalking the Herd, I would say that plus David Perkins' databases were the two main databases that I was able to coalesce together and collate, along with some of your work, Tommy Bland. There were a number of folks that came and went over the years that got involved, including Gabe Valdez and others. I was able to, fortunately, again, stand on the shoulders of giants and put all these databases
yeah. You
together.
did. You did a great
And
job of it.
yeah,
A really great
there's
job. Um, I wish there were more. I wish there were more people doing this type of research and providing databases that we could depend upon. It becomes very difficult. And for me, I didn't have the money to go traipsing all over throughout the country and do the research I wanted to be able to do on the subject. But I was happy that I got to spend at least a week or more in Dulce, and I certainly got earfuls of information, and I learned a great deal about what is predator damage, what isn't predator damage, and uh, the Gomez's, Manuel and all of them, they really knew ranching and they knew cows, and they were not people that would say, "Oh, this is something totally inexplicable, and it's something that could be explained." What they were pointing to were very clear
yes.
examples. And I always said, I don't know about other parts of the country. I don't know about the Kansas cases or all these others. I don't know. Were there veterinary pathologists involved? And that's what I was brought into task by Ian Summers and Dan Kagan, especially. Dan Kagan said, "Why would you rely on information being provided from a newspaper clipping and not from a veterinary pathologist?" You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and it's
Well,
true.
one thing that doesn't often get mentioned when you talk about the Gomez's and their cattle operation in Dulce, New Mexico, right on the border there between Colorado and New Mexico, about 40, less than 50 miles away from the San Luis Valley, I might add, where
Hmm.
I did my work. Their cattle could possibly be considered the oldest established bloodline
Yes, we
of
talked about
Spanish
that.
cattle in North America. I mean,
Yeah,
they could trace the bloodlines all the way back into the 1500s,
Yes.
and in some cases even further back to Spain in the 1400s.
Yes. Yes.
And I've always found the assertion that, well, these people, they're just hard scrabble, amateur ranchers.
No, 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 no.
We're
Absolutely.
talking 7 generations of ranchers that are looking at these things and going, well, that's not a lightning strike, it's not Clostridia, it's not blackleg, it's not anthrax. These various deadly diseases and afflictions that can strike down cattle and routinely do. 2% of all cattle die. And so
Mhm.
they're always looking at dead cows, whether they like it or not. It's just part of the natural
Right.
attrition
Right.
that goes on in the pastures of the world. And, uh, you know, I love the one comment. This one rancher had a 2,500 pound Simmental bull that was mutilated. And the rancher said, well, I don't know who in the hell had the guts to go out there and do that to my bull. I can't, he says, I was never able to even go out in the pasture with the bull. If he saw me there, he would exhaust all efforts to kill me. He said the thing was just an absolute beast. Uh, he said, you and what army cut that bull's balls off? I want to know.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
should give workshops.
I mean, I think that was the thing I was struck with too, was just the, you know, your 1,000-pound bulls and the way they would just go down. And you say, okay, we could speculate from here to eternity as to what could bring it down. But I no longer second guess what our military and what our
Yeah.
scientific knowledge really is. And this is the thing too. There's so much naivete, I feel, that people have about how far ahead are we actually with regard to technology, medical technology.
Yeah.
Medical technology is advancing at such an incredible rate. So back at the time that these things were happening, and people would say, well, in order to get you know, a portable laser would be the size of a dishwasher or whatever to bring it into this area. How do you do that and all that? But again, why do we constantly, we are aware of the fact that they're always ahead of us by 20, 30, 40 years in terms of real technology that has not been introduced yet into our culture and our day-to-day living. So why do we think that it's impossible that they couldn't have a silent helicopter in 1980? I mean, I remember talking to Arthur Young. I talked to everybody. I was talking to Arthur Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, and we were talking about silent helicopter because no, there's no such thing as a silent helicopter. There's no technology it's impossible to do that. And I go, well, how about almost quiet? He goes, well, you could muffle it maybe they found this way. He was speculating of different things that they use. And I go, I have a feeling they already have all that.
Oh yeah.
I,
Um,
I and
I
I
I've
don't
seen
have
an
proof.
ad. I've seen an ad for McDonnell Douglas with a dog laying on a porch.
Hmm.
And he's kind of 3/4 view to the camera, looking at the cameraman. And behind him, out in the yard, this helicopter comes down, and it hovers there, and the dog never has no idea it's there. And then the
Wow.
helicopter goes back up, and then the cameraman whistles to the dog, and the dog gets up and comes over. And then the tagline is, some people say that we make silent helicopters, yeah, which we can neither confirm or deny,
Oh, that's
but
hilarious.
McDonnell
I
Douglas,
never
and that
saw.
was the ad.
Oh,
And
wow. That's really funny. That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
I had a couple of guys that were snooping around an Air National Guard facility in the Rocky Mountains up in northern Colorado, and it was a Sunday, and there were no there was no maneuvers or trainings or whatever going on that day. I think it was like a Memorial Day or something. It was a it was an off weekend, and so they climbed the fence and filmed themselves running up to the hangar, and it was really well done. It was like the guy obviously went to film school because it was so well done, and they open the door to the hangar and they go in and they start filming the helicopters. Well, what they filmed, and they contacted me to get my opinion on what it was that they actually filmed. And below uh, the rotor, coming
Hmm.
out of the top of the helicopter, were two large, very exotic looking speaker arrays. And I did a little research and showed him around and was told that this is the noise abatement equipment. And
Ah.
what they do is they take the sound of the motor and the sound of the actual mechanism that creates the lift that allows the helicopter to fly, and they take the exact opposite sound that those mechanical parts and processes emit. The whirring sound, the motor sound, any of the metallic sounds of the motor, they broadcast the exact opposite sound and then blend the two sounds together, and they negate each other. One renders the other. Uh, Everything goes from above zero and below zero to zero in terms
Wow.
of sound, and
Wow, that's fascinating.
the type of technology is called noise abatement
Yeah.
technology. And a really good example of this was a case I had just south of the Alamosa Airport, a rancher named John Haar. Now, he was a helicopter mechanic in the Navy, and he had been around every type of helicopter that we fly, from Army Huey types and the little bird scout helicopters to the big Sikorskis and Chinooks. Even he said he even worked on the Jolly Green Giant, the big lift helicopters.
Hmm.
And he was woken up one night and he heard the thrashing sound coming from outside, and he looked out, and all the cottonwood trees around his ranch house were just looked like they were in a hurricane. So he ran downstairs, ran outside, grabbed a big old flashlight, and he pointed it up to see what was making there was no apparent weather out. And so he wanted to see what was going on. And he pointed the flashlight up, and there was a huge, he said it was a sea stallion sized, so a helicopter that can fit 30, 40 people, was hovering over his cottonwood trees. And it was so low that the prop wash was whipping all these big giant 60, 70 foot cottonwood trees, whipping them around. He said, but there wasn't a single sound coming from the the
Hmm.
mechanism
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
that allowed the helicopter to operate. Now, your average rancher tells you that that's one thing. This guy was the postmaster of his town. He was a member in good standing of all the local cattle
Hmm.
organizations, and
Hmm.
a member of good standing. Did a complete background check on the guy. He was a pillar of the community, an elder in his church, and I went out there because he said the following morning when he went back out, four of his cattle had been mutilated. And it was one of my better cases of all the ones that I went out on because of the quality of the witness. And,
Yeah.
okay, maybe Linda Howe is right. Maybe, she took an offhand comment made by Los Animas, Colorado Sheriff Lou Girodo, who said that these are UFOs that are masquerading as helicopters that are responsible for at least some of the mutilations. And because he had seen one turn into a silver ball and fly off at fantastic speed. So, you know, my point being is you've got to look at all the data. You have to be intellectually honest and realize that no matter what explanation you come up with, that's only going to be about 10% of the data that's going to support that explanation. And there's 90% of the data that refutes it. And it's up to us to be intellectually honest to always keep that in mind. If I get into a debate about cattle mutilations and I take the Kagan and Summers debunker side, I'll always win, because no matter what explanation you come up with, there's 9 times the data to refute it. And I think we're dealing with something at the core that happens usually at the beginning of a wave. It's the first cases. These are the cases least likely to be reported by the rancher. And these are the core cases that probably go back thousands of years into possibly even to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. It's what was mutilating sheep around London by the hundreds in 1606 during the early days of the reign of James I. Now, there's something at the core of this mystery that is not the government. It doesn't rely on what we would consider as advanced, modern, high technology. It's a predatory force that probably exists alongside us that we're not aware of. It only manifests at certain times in certain locations for an as yet unknown agenda. And because of its pervasiveness, has probably led to the ancient human practice of animal sacrifice. And, possibly the Dinka or the Nuer or the Maasai in Africa, when they sacrifice a head of livestock, they're doing it so that the gods don't come down and take the best animals, the preferable animals, the animals that they rely on as breeding stock. They sacrifice the older and the sick and the less desirable animals to placate whatever the god is, the gods that's coming down and doing this. Now, if you look at the trickster phenomenon, I wrote a whole book on the trickster archetype that is found in thousands and thousands of permutations around the world and in original cultures. And one of the things that the trickster is known for is taking the sexual organs of livestock. And I always found this very fascinating. And if you go to the Philippines, you go to parts of Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, the Aborigines in Australia, Native Americans, as you mentioned at the top of the show here in North America. If you look at some of their beliefs around the evisceration or the mutilation, if you will, of animals, you'll find that this has probably existed as far back as humans have been able to domesticate livestock. And I think that this core mystery only represents 1 or 2% of the actual numeric total, and that the other 9 or 10 or 12% of cases, real cases that happen with intent, with intelligence, with tools, that those are attended to or alongside the actual high strange cases that we cannot explain with modern diagnostic technology. And I hate to want my what's to have my cake and eat it too, but I do think that we are dealing with a multi-headed hydra of possibility here, and that all bets are off when it comes to any sort of attempt to place all these cases under one perpetrator, in one perpetrator's lap, and say this is the end all to be all. This is what's responsible. We're looking at this as the single answer. It's a multiple groups in multiple scenario.
So I guess we're not gonna solve this today, I guess. Huh?
No.
Well, you
No.
know, Keel seemed to think that, you know, that that this phenomena control people too, and sometimes that some of the MIB were like people who were controlled, or what he said, possessed. You know, and then some of them were like apparitional projections or three-dimensional projections that were very sophisticated, and it you know, it's like all these different things, like you say, that are going on.
Yeah,
Um,
there's so many permutations, and I think the problem is a lot of people just not only don't have the stomach for it, you know,
mhm,
because it's a gruesome subject. First of all, the mutilations,
yeah,
but you know, actually doing uh, research, you know, on dead cows, as Chris knows, and he's described it in, you know, nauseating detail. Um, as if all everybody, I mean, it's not something I would ever desire to do. But not just that, they can't stomach the contradictions
Yeah.
within phenomena. They don't have the ability to handle contradictions uh, in evidence. And again, this goes back, I just think, to a lot of these psychological principles, and also what I always refer to as tribalism. So you have, you know, tribal ufologists, right? And they have a particular agenda and they're looking at a particular group of things. And then you have people on the other side, you know, the Forteans, right? Of whom I sort of loosely consider myself a member, along with Brent. And we like to think that we're open to the possibility that there's these interconnections between all the phenomena. And you know, the problem with that is it sounds good, but is it really an explanation? You're just replacing one type of vocabulary with another group of vocabulary in an attempt to try to squeeze it into something. um, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you know, and this was John Keel, you know, when he and I would talk, or he would express his opinion, you know, he said, well, it's all related. It's all interrelated. And I would say to him, how? How is it interrelated? In what way? Based on what scientific principles? Are you saying that cattle mutilations are related to spontaneous human combustion cases, or cases of other Fortean phenomena that are happening in these so-called window areas? What exactly is the connection? Is it electromagnetic? Does it have to do with you know, solar flares or solar activity? Or what exactly are you pointing to? And he would say, oh, it's, you know, you're never going to be able to. Well, you know, that's the way that people back out of it, is they go, we don't know. We don't know enough about it. And after a while, it sort of becomes, well, that's kind of, that doesn't really offer much hope if you're just going to say it's all connected. Um, the only thing we're left with is the ability to be able to take one thing, look at it, analyze it on its own, separate from all these other things. And possibly there are connections, but I think that's too far afield for us to really say or even speculate. That, what do you think, Chris?
Well, you know, again, I think one of the things that is intellectually most compelling to me is this automatic self-negating quality
Hmm.
that I was describing before, where you know one explanation can only take you so far, and what that does is it sets up psychologically, as you well know, it sets up conditions in the mind where people can't deal with conundrums that are self-negating, and they would rather not think about it than take the situation and the subject as a challenge intellectually to try to figure it out. David
Hmm.
Perkins, who I'm extremely close to, and yeah, I mean, he's the, as far as I'm concerned, he's one of the unsung hero thinkers and creative thinkers in the field.
Oh, absolutely.
He 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 said that he believes that, and he does use the B word, believe, which you'll never hear me. You'll never hear me saying I believe any of this. I accept all possibility, but I don't believe in any of it.
Hmm.
As
Hmm.
soon as you start believing one thing, that means you don't believe in something else, and you got to keep an open mind in this subject.
Hmm.
Believe, me. So he said that he feels that the the UFO phenomenon may be the key for humans to finally break into the realm of understanding fully and defining human consciousness. He thinks that the UFOs are a linchpin in that process, that revelatory process of understanding the width and breadth and depth of human consciousness.
Hmm.
And he said, and if you want to understand the UFO phenomenon, you got to crack the cattle mutilation phenomenon, because that's the key to understanding human consciousness vis-a-vis through our 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 relationship with these whirling mandalas of change in the sky, as Carl Jung would call them.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to agree with that, and I think that it's ingenious the way the whole thing was devised. And I think one good way of illustrating that is that we had our first waves of mutilation cases in Minnesota in 1970. And then it worked its way down into the upper Midwest in 1971. And it stopped cold. And there was not one case reported in the continental United States during the entire year of 1972.
Hmm.
Now, the other thing that was going on besides mutilations in 70 and 71 were pig thefts. Something or somebody or some group was coming down in Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska and stealing entire pig pens full of pigs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were disappearing, and nobody could figure out what the heck was going on. Well, David and I were kicking this around, trying to figure out, what happened between 1971 and 73, when, of course, in 73, the mutilations became, front page news, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases all of a sudden littering the pastures of mid-America. And so we found one thing that was very, very curious, that very few people really are aware of, and that is 50 caribou were found mutilated outside of Fort Greely in Alaska. That was the only anomalous animal death case that we could locate in the entire country for the whole year. And we always thought that was kind of strange. And then, it was just a couple months ago, Alaska's first official cattle mutilation was reported, guess where? Right outside of Fort Greely, Alaska.
Oh, really?
Just a couple months ago.
I didn't know that. Oh.
And here's another little name game scenario. We have a fairly recent addition to the mutilation investigator fold, Chuck Zukowski,
Mm-hmm.
who has come up with a theory that the 37th latitude line.
Oh, the power.
Parallel.
Yeah, that theory doesn't wash.
Hey, it's creative thinking.
No, and I admire that, but when you test it out,
yeah. There's no.
That's no.
Well, David and I were talking about that, saying, why? How could you say that mutilations only occur, or predominantly occur, and UFO sightings along this latitude line across North America?
Mm-hmm.
And mutilations, they happen everywhere. How about cases in Patagonia?
Right.
And David goes, Patagonia? When were there cases in Patagonia? And I said, well, I don't think there were. I just picked the furthest place away that I could think of, and used that as an example. 10 days later, there were 12 mutilations.
I was going to say, it sounds familiar, Patagonia.
Wow.
I love it.
Well, listen, that reminds me.
Magonia.
That
would be
you told me in an early interview in 2009, Chris, that the fall of 1998 and the spring of 1999, after you had already established a good group of, veterinarians and people to work with you on cattle
Yeah.
mutilations, and suddenly there were no cases, and they had all
7
gone
years.
to South America.
7 years. Yeah. It's so funny. I was one of the very few people that was publicly chastising Robert Bigelow and his National Institute for Discovery Sciences, who Gabe actually ended up working with for about 5 years. And, I was calling Dr. John Alexander, the head of ex-head of non-lethal weapons technology,
Yeah.
Dr. Death, because he had
Uh-huh.
had a
Uh-huh.
PhD in thanatology, the study of death.
Uh-huh.
What a perfect person to have,
Yeah.
head your non-lethal weapons program. And Alexander started getting a little testy, and when you start having known intelligence operatives getting a little testy with you, you figure out ways to bury the hatchet that don't involve your head. And
Mhm.
I they started publishing, and they published some of the best science that we have looking at the cattle mutilation phenomenon. Dr. George Onett, the NIDS
Mhm.
veterinary pathologist, and Dr. Colm Kelleher, managing director of NIDS, turned out he was the managing director for OSOP and the 20 some odd $1 billion or $1 million program that the intelligence services ran with Lou Elizondo and others. Uh, I finally realized these guys were really trying to do the right thing, and they were kicking and screaming. They were actually publishing papers, much to their consternation of being taken as kooks in
Mhm.
academia.
Mhm.
So I said, look, you guys, me kicking you in the shin and trying to get you to do the right thing has evidently worked. And so I really want to dovetail my efforts with you guys. And so, it was about a month or two process where all my veterinarians were trained. They were given protocols for field necropsies done to
Mm.
the specificity required by NIDS. I had a budget. I could charge their time to NIDS. They would pay for all tests. They would pay for shipping, for additional on-site work that was being done. And this is about a 2 or 3 month process where I got all my ducks in a row. And it was like, okay, here we go. Now we're ready to rock. I was really excited.
Yeah.
And as Brent
Oh
pointed out,
God.
I didn't have a case for 7 years. So I guess maybe there's something to be said for be extra careful what you don't wish for. So, and of course, after that, I began to realize that I couldn't believe how I was able to go around and literally investigate 200 or so cases, and it became my least favorite thing to do
Of course.
in life. Uh, it still is, and I ended up moving to states that one of their distinctions was that they never had mutilation cases, just to be on the safe side. So
Wow.
yeah. Well,
Jesus.
I don't know of any cases in New York State, for instance.
New York State.
There've been
No.
some human
Yeah.
mutilations, but there haven't been any animal
No.
mutilation.
No.
When I moved to Arizona, there had only been 12 cases reported in the decades. Coincidentally, they happened the month before Travis Walton was abducted, all
Uh,
around the area that he was abducted. But don't tell Linda. So yeah, it some of the weird synchronicities that have happened. I love this one phone call. I called Perkins up. I said, "Hey, we had 2 new cases. One was in Perkins County, where was it, Wyoming, and the other was in Adams County,
oh my
Colorado."
God. That's so funny. Yeah.
Of course, Tom Adams and David Perkins being in my estimation, the two most important individuals in the field of the amateur investigators.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
I,
Well,
I I did really respect Ted Oliphant's research.
yeah,
I had numerous communications with Ted when he was there, and of course this was a man of controversy because of the files kind of disappearing, um, from down there. But anyway, his research, I thought, and it was the first time I ever heard anyone suggest that perhaps what they might be studying was related to Crutchfield and Alzheimer's, that mad cow disease as it's known.
I put him up to it, but
Oh, maybe it was you that
I was
instigated
well.
that.
I always he was the first one to publish. He and I had talked about that, and David had talked about that
Okay.
based on my research of the outbreak of mad cow in England. And
So did,
at the
so
time,
did
it was
Colm Kelleher get it from you? Because I was surprised when I saw his book come out. What is it, Brain Trust, which I read. And he's proposing this like it's a brand new theory. And I'm thinking, I remember hearing this a long time ago.
yeah, yeah,
And
and also
he doesn't credit anybody with this theory. He makes
no,
it sound like he just came up with it. And I'm not. I think I like Colm Kelleher. I think he's done some great
yeah.
research.
Well,
Um,
there were some of us that were kicking around. Phil Duke was another one.
okay, I never heard it before then. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and Philip Hoyle in England at the Animal Field Pathology Unit. There were a bunch of us that were kicking the idea around. Ted put it on the map with his article, Mad Cows
Yeah, I guess that's what did it.
that
Yeah.
I've known. That was the first attempt to actually publish something and
And
spread it around.
Ted had an informant. He wouldn't. He called him Phil, but he said, "I can't. I'm not allowed to reveal his name." But anyway, this guy would put him on to different things, give him suggestions, where to look, blah blah blah. And he said he thought he was some sort of intelligence, somebody in the intelligence circles. And he said, but he would also tell him to, if he wanted to see where the helicopters were taking off from, that he would. To go out, and he would actually see them refueling and
Yeah,
heading toward
yeah.
Sand Mountain, I think. And he said,
Well, they were coming out of Fort Campbell.
right, and I think Tommy Bland was,
Yeah.
didn't he say that in the that interview that you did, Brent, where he talked
Mhm.
about that he was pretty certain that it was coming from that particular base where the
Yeah.
choppers were, um, at least for the ones that were doing the work in Alabama. Um, but Ted,
Well, that was Ted's first. That was his first theory, and this came from a rancher who had been involved in some operations, I think, in Vietnam,
yeah,
bacteriological operations in conjunction possibly with the Army Chemical Corps, and that he was convinced that they were conducting bacteriological experiments. And then
yeah,
the
hmm
more he digged, and then started, putting feelers out to other individuals in the investigative field, thinking, well, what do you think of this? And then that's when I kind of reminded him that we were at the height of the largest outbreak of mad cow disease on the planet,
right,
which
right,
was occurring, really nasty outbreak in England. And then as soon as they started to get a handle on what they were dealing with there, and the Nobel Prize for Medicine hadn't been awarded to Stanley Prusner, the discoverer of the prion, yet,
hmm
but they were starting to realize that there was some causative element going on. That's when they had an outbreak of hoof and mouth disease,
hmm
which is the second most virulent and scary thing to happen in cattle country. And
hmm
so when that happened, then the government said, in the British Isles, all heads of livestock are to be culled. Their bodies are to be burnt,
yeah, I remember
and we
that.
will not have one head of livestock. And it took about a year and a half to do this.
hmm
And they ended up killing 4.5 million head of livestock
Amazing.
by 1996. And then at that point, they didn't know what to do with all the bone ash. That's a lot of ash from 4.5 billion head of cattle. Imagine the pile of ash that you generate, right? So they
Yeah.
were storing it in old abandoned blimp hangars from from World War II,
Oh my
and
God.
and then they said, well, we're running out of room. So they started bagging it up and selling it at a cut rate price.
What?
It ended up being sold to over 70 countries.
Oh my Lord.
And at the time, they didn't realize that the prions could easily survive
Yeah, of course.
heat up to about 2,500 degrees. Then you don't kill the prions. You basically render them inert. They can reconstitute themselves and
Wow.
then continue. In obviously, most of them are going to be rendered inert, but some will still be able to maintain that. What's the equation of life? It can replicate, create
Right.
more life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you can kill it because it's
Mm-hmm.
alive. That's the definition of life. Well, prions don't meet that definition because pure bleach won't kill
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a prion.
Right.
Prions can
Right.
survive in the soil, they know, at least for 5 years. It can pass through into the roots of vegetables. So you have in England 20, 30-year vegetarians dying of mad cow disease in humans, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I have quite a sizable chapter in Stalking the Herd
Yeah, you did. It's
that
very informative.
looks at all this.
Yeah.
Colin didn't go into as much detail about the outbreak in England and some of the things that I did in my book. He
Mm-hmm.
was looking more at the connection between the misstated levels of dementia in this country, which is off the charts. In the last 20 years, I think we're 6,000 times the number of dementia cases. And if you die of dementia in this country, you're not autopsied. It's not an affliction that requires a determination of the cause of death. And so, to give you an example, there was a study done by some doctoral students, medical students at the University of Pennsylvania, and they drew a 100-mile circle around the school, and they got funding to autopsy all individuals that died within that 100-mile circle who died of dementia or Alzheimer's or other dementia related type of afflictions, and who normally wouldn't be autopsy unless they're part of a crime or something, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what they found was horrifying. That a sizable percentage, I think it was over a quarter of the people that died were dying of undiagnosed Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease.
Mm-hmm.
I did
Yeah, I've read papers on that, on the misdiagnosis of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, this has been, I think there were articles in Nature, I forget where else, some other journals that I read where they
yeah, well,
talked
yeah,
about this,
there
which I
was
always thought was
truth in
very
this.
interesting. Yeah.
I did my first Stalking the Herd talk in Minneapolis
Uh,
back in, I think it would have been 2014.
okay.
Um, Beautiful facility. It was the old train station downtown, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a good turnout, a couple hundred people, which for the subject is actually a
Yeah,
pretty
it's
good
quite
turnout.
good. Yeah.
And I mentioned, these facts about dementia deaths and Creutzfeldt-Jakob's and Alzheimer's and plaque deposits in the brain and misfolded
Mm-hmm.
proteins. I went into some detail on this, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease occurs naturally to one person out of every million.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the number representing spontaneous misfolding of
Mm-hmm.
proteins
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a person, which is pretty rare uh, when you think about it. And after my talk was done, there was a group of people that immediately zeroed in on me. And out of that group of people, six of them, six, wanted to tell me about somebody, a brother, a relative, a neighbor, a best friend, someone who was very close to the individual who was diagnosed with Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease and died. Now,
Wow.
what are the
What are the
odds?
odds of that?
200 people,
Uh-huh.
six would come up to me and tell me these just absolutely horrific
Wow.
stories. And what most people don't understand is chronic wasting disease (CWD) basically is the same disease, but as it manifests in game animals like deer and elk.
Right.
Ever since the outbreak of October 1997, where we had 2 million trees laid down flat in 5 minutes along the Continental Divide, it's where nature came down and uh, gave gave the planet a big bitch slap whack. Uh, Within a week, 10 days, chronic wasting disease broke out in the deer and elk herds along the Continental Divide west of Fort Collins, where this blowdown happened, and since then has spread to pretty much the entire eastern half of the United States, all from that one outbreak. And the first outbreak that occurred happened again in Fort Collins at the Rocky Mountain Biophysical Laboratory in the land where they were grazing test animals. All of a sudden, mad cow or Creutzfeldt Jakob or chronic wasting disease broke out in the deer and elk herds in the fall of 1967, which was the first known outbreak in nature of this type of affliction in livestock.
Mm-hmm.
So, what else happened in fall of 67? The Snippy case, of course. We also had some pretty interesting statistics for hunters, predominantly being the individuals that are being thought to develop mad cow disease symptoms or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease symptoms because of eating infected
Okay. Yeah.
wild game.
Right. Yeah,
And
I know that. Yeah.
I,
You know,
I,
I,
I
I
always
want.
thought, go ahead,
I
Peter.
want, I want, I want, I'm sorry to have to interrupt because this is very mind-boggling, thought-provoking stuff. But unfortunately, I have a situation where I'm going to have to say in about 10 minutes, and I have to discontinue the interview. And I
Okay.
didn't know when I originally set this up, I didn't know I was going to have this deadline here. But I would like to go ahead and offer that we do this again later on if
Sure.
everybody is
I'd love
interested.
to do that.
We can
Yeah.
find a time that'll be
We,
better for Chris too later in
yeah.
the day, as you and I have discussed, Peter.
My brain's a little foggy, but I think I'm holding my own.
I think we will, absolutely.
I just wanted to ask you, Chris. You're touching on that's something that's always interested me: the possible relationship with Creutzfeldt or whatever. And one thing that I was always intrigued by are the reports of what happens to some of these animals before there's a discovered animal mutilation. So, for example, when I was talking to Manuel Gomez, I asked him, I said, before the cows, uh, these were, I think, at the time of memory serves, I think it were primarily bulls uh, that were in the herd, that the ones that seemed to be the targets of the mutilations in that particular group. And I said, did you notice anything odd about them, prior to them being mutilated? He says, yeah, they got what we call blind staggers,
Yeah.
where they couldn't walk. And a lot of times, and I said, well, is that something common? He goes, well, when it does occur, it usually is associated with loco weed, which is found. But he goes, we don't have loco weed. So we explored that possibility, but those were the animals that were mutilated. Then I
Well,
think
and you have the fluorescing material that was
on
found in the
top of that,
packs.
yeah, we have that, which I always thought was very important to look at, because again, in my case, being exploratory at the time and being a paranormal researcher that worked a lot with psychics, that had worked with police departments, so forth, I decided, why don't I do something? This is before remote viewing was really that popular. And they did psychometry, but I used the Dulce, New Mexico. The only photos I had were the ones from that particular group. That's why I didn't extrapolate to any other cases. I was just saying I'm concentrating on these. And the thing that I found fascinating about that was that every single psychic, independent of one another, reported the same thing, that it was earth-based, it was technological. One of the psychics I worked with that I'd been working with for years, was a biologist at Bell Labs. He won all kinds of awards. Absolute brilliant man, but also from the age 5, when he developed a heart failure, he suddenly had psychic impressions, and he didn't know what they were about. Anyway, later on, he realized that these things could help him in life, and so he worked with police and elsewhere. And the first thing he said when he touched the photos that I had, he was just doing psychometry, was, he goes, some animal, and he goes, he's down like this. He goes, they go right down. He goes, they go right down, so you won't see anything. He goes, they just go. I go, well, how do they go down? He goes, they hit him in the head with something. I want to say it looks like electricity coming out, something. And he goes, it just causes the whole body, but it keeps the body in a certain state where they can do these tests. It's very important that the animal be in a certain state when they do this. And he goes, but they're pre-marked. He goes, I see them doing something. Do they show up beforehand? Because they're doing something to the animal, and that's interacting with something else in the bloodstream that's causing something, and they want to study that, and they need to do it in this location, right? And I always found that to be very interesting. And then he said to me, something happens before these things happen. Do the eyes change colors? And I thought, the eye changed color? No. And then I remember I was going through, and I don't know if it was your book or where I was reading. It was Tommy Roy Bland. It was Tommy Roy Bland when he was talking to you, and he was talking about Snippy, and that I guess he interviewed.
Yeah, there was a bull that was blinded. Yeah.
But he said the eye was bluish, bluish tint. And I thought, where have I heard this? And I remember it was the psychic that I had worked with. That was one of the things he talked about, that the eye color had changed, or there were things happening. And then there were others that were like that. I think even the Skinwalker Ranch, when you did the interview with remind me, the
Katie,
no, the original owner,
Terry Sherman.
I think he talked in there and described some of the things that happened to the animals beforehand, right? Didn't the hooves look like ski? There was something, I don't know if there was
that was a Snippy case. There
I'm
was a bull calf.
Yeah.
That had a kind of a deformed head, and it developed these weird, almost like skids on a sleigh or something. They had these like very exaggerated curved hooves, and it also went blind, and it developed the foggy eyes, and was tumbling around.
So my question to you, and this is more intuitive than it is anything factual at all, just intuitive. Is it possible that in case like that, for example, where they saw those small plane, those jets flying overhead, right?
Yeah. I've seen one.
I'm
really close to me too.
But is it possible that they spray something, or they treat the animal beforehand overhead with something, leave, come back, do a test, and part of what you're seeing beforehand? Because I remember looking at those kinds of cases and thinking, it's funny, no one's concentrating on what's happening just before. Right. They're so worried about trying to prove that this is alien or whatever. When you look at something like that, you say, again, alien. I mean, an alien consciousness just decides, okay, I'm going to come in here and do this and treat this animal, and then we'll go and mutilate it later on. I mean, yeah, it's possible. But I just thought to myself, this sounds like an Earth-based technology where somebody is testing something.
Yeah.
Yep. Right? I mean, that's as far as I can go with it.
I absolutely
something. And whether it's just whether it's just that, or it's more complicated by what the sensitive said to me, pretty much all of them, that this has to do with DNA recombinant research, that they're doing gene splicing, and they're not, and it can lead to the psychic I worked with, that was the biologist, said they're doing something with the genes, but it's causing something to spread. It's spreading through the food chain, and that's why they need to test it in that area.
Well, and that's why they don't go into. We haven't had a single case in a super feedlot
Right.
of 10,000
Never heard of
animals or
people. I know.
100,000 animals. Not one case.
So,
We
so
had a
what?
case on just on the other side of the fence line, but we've never had a case, and that's not by accident.
No.
And another thing that I find kind of intriguing is why these more Johnny come lately investigators don't report using a black light over the backs of cattle to see if they.
Hmm.
As soon as I heard that there were, black light or fluorescing material on the backs of cows, I went out and got a black light, battery powered black light that I could use on site. It wasn't very strong, but it was strong enough so that if I was able to cover the animal up, hold my breath, and run the light up and down the back, I would have been able
Right.
to find evidence of fluorescent material if had it been there. Never found a single case that had that. We've had
Hmm.
cases that had marks on the back, like a big giant clamp had latched onto the animal. And we haven't even talked about the evidence of the animal being dropped from a considerable height of at least 30 or 40 feet or more. But I guess when we come back, we can get into more of the nuances because there's so many.
Yeah, man, these interactions between the two and all these things you guys
I have
do.
to. I just
Wow.
have to apologize, but I just find this the entire thing just so fascinating because the other thing that it does, I've often wondered this even my own interest in this subject. If one of the reasons that many of us are pulled this way or that in the subject is so that we can expand our knowledge base and learn more about everything or try to,
Yeah.
and that it actually is it creates a spark in us to actually move out of our comfort zone and start thinking about things in a way that
Yeah,
perhaps we never thought before, and to open ourselves up to other disciplines, not just talking like for me, talking just to psychologists, psychiatrists, I'll get one point of view. But if I talk to a biologist, even a biologist or scientist outside of this particular field and ask their opinion, even if it's skeptical, sometimes what they'll say will encourage me to look at something that perhaps could give us shed some more light on that particular area. And I
yeah,
think if you
yeah.
don't do that in life, then you don't grow.
Well, and you're not being
Mhm.
intellectually honest.
You're not being honest. Well, that
Yeah,
goes without saying,
And it's where the trickster can become the teacher sometimes if we don't get hung up on one particular
Well, that
focus.
was George Hansen who wrote a great book on the
oh yeah,
trickster. Another great book on the trickster, in addition to your Stalking the Trickster. Those two are great books. But I remember he and I used to talk, and he said to me, "You're never going to figure. I can't figure it out. None of us are going to figure out all of these different things. It's so multifaceted. It's so complicated." But he said the trickster is at the heart of it, and
yeah,
if the trickster's at the heart of it, then
yeah,
you definitely, and he felt that was sewn in. That
yeah.
was like, I think Greg Bishop says it's baked into the formula
Right.
for the subject. And you know what? I used to think, I don't know. Yeah, I understand the trickster, but I don't think it's a driving force. It's definitely that.
It's a mechanism that ties all these things
Oh,
together.
it absolutely is. And
Yeah,
it's very
yeah,
frustrating because you think you can make progress. And then all of a sudden you just realize one step forward, two, four, five, a mile back, and you're back. And then you say, okay, let me start all over and let me try it from this point of view.
yeah,
And I think that's what I like. To me, it's the Rubik's Cube, cattle mutilation, the
yeah.
Rubik's
It
Cube
is of the
of
paranormal.
the paranormal because
But
you
Oh
just
man,
try all
could
these
I
different.
quote you? Oh man, that's a
Yeah, no,
great.
no. I mean, I always think that. I
I
always think,
love it. The
yeah.
cattle
let's
mutilation, the Rubik's cube of the paranormal. I love it.
let's regroup soon then
Oh,
and
absolutely. It's a
continue
pleasure to
to.
do this. And he's got so much more to offer. And then I do want to talk to him too about his uh Brent, I don't know if you know that he's he's got a project with the San Luis Valley for uh the ultimate remote viewing. Uh
We're in 9 countries and 53
Yeah, and
locations.
I want to find out more. I know something about it. I'd love
Mhm.
to see examples of
Yeah.
where this is being applied, and if there are videos that we can watch of where this is being monitored.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
fascinated by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's talking about UFO DAP.
Yes.
Staff.com.
So
Yeah.
we'll get into that too. I really want to talk to him about that. And
All right.
Brent, you're allowed to ask a question or two from time to time if you want.
Well, I have enjoyed just listening primarily to the two of you because you were both so much into all of this material with the cattle mutilation scenario, and although I was brought into it years ago in 1970, correspondence with Tom Adams when he was just getting his feet wet on that,
Yeah.
and but I haven't followed it as strictly. I got off into other areas, and I'm trying to,
Well, I
learn.
educated. I kind of brought you up to speed, and it was great
Yes,
because
you have.
you had a good repository of letters and communications that you kept all these years with Tom Adams and Massey. I didn't know about any of that. I didn't know
Well,
about any
I,
of that,
I have
and
been
it was
guilty of
really
being a
interesting
hoarder
for
when
me to
it
hear
comes
about
to
some of that.
material and stuff.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate the both of you doing this, podcast here with me,
Yeah,
and we'll definitely line up another one as soon as
for sure.
everybody's.
And
Yeah.
Chris, I hope I hope you didn't put you through too much because I know you're just recuperating from everything. But
Well,
you know,
it's probably good. I go
yeah.
through most of my days without talking, and talking,
Oh
or
wow.
back in the old days when I was smoking, singing would help clear out my lungs, and so
Yeah,
doing a
yeah,
bunch of
yeah.
talking actually is a good thing. It's therapeutic.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen.
All
Well,
right.
I'm gonna hit the recorder. Thanks again, and let's stay in touch.
All right.
Take
Be in
care.
touch. All right. Take care, guys.
Bye bye.